We are in the middle of a sermon series that we are calling 18 Summers. We began 3 weeks ago with a simple but yet unsettling truth, and that is that each parent is handed a sacred gift. And that is 18 summers, 18 seasons to shape a heart, to plant seeds of faith, to model a life that is centered on God. And in the first week, we talked about how faith is caught and not just taught, that the foundation of a child's life begins with their seeing the adults around them put faith in God above everything else. And then last week, we talked about the importance of loving God with all that we are, with all that we have, not just as a habit, not just as a cultural inheritance, but as a genuine, a personal, a thirsty relationship with the living God. And this week, we're going to turn outward, from the vertical to the horizontal, from loving God to loving everyone. And before I begin this morning, I want to tell you where I've been this week, because I think it matters in what I'm about to say. And that is that I spent the last week keynoting church camp for 95 high school students down at our denomination's campground known as Disciples Crossing in Athens, Texas. And the reason that I think that matters is because right in the middle of a series about what we want our kids to catch from watching our lives, I felt the weight of that. Because you can't preach faith is caught, not taught, and then just phone it in. And so I tried to show up fully for those young people. And on the very first day, on Monday, as we gathered for the first time, I told them that I loved going to camp when I was a youth. That when I was in high school, that those weeks at camp every summer shaped who I am, personally, professionally, spiritually. They shaped me more than just about anything else in my life. Because what I found at camp and what I hoped that they would find this week was a place where we can be loved for who we are, not for who people think that we should be. There was another gift. There was another gift that I didn't quite expect, and that is my youngest daughter, Caroline, who just turned 19 the week before last, whose birthday quietly marked the end of our 18 summers, is spending her summer working at that camp. And so I got to watch her work. I got to watch her wash dishes for 120 people. But I also got to see her love those students and pour into a place that has come to mean so much to her. I got to see something being lived out that I can only hope was caught somewhere along the way. I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. The text that we're going to read this morning, the first is from John chapter 13, the night before Jesus is crucified. And he's gathered with his disciples for the very last time, and in that moment, knowing what was coming, he doesn't give them a theological treatise. He doesn't tell them what to believe. He gives them a commandment, the commandment. And so I want you to listen for what he says will be the mark of his followers. Not their doctrine, not their attendance, not their moral record, but something else. And then we're going to read from Colossians chapter 3, where Paul gives us something remarkably practical. A list of what love actually looks like when you put it on in the morning. I want you to listen for the clothing language that he uses, because he means it literally. And then finally, our text will be from 1 John chapter 4, one of the most direct, one of the most demanding passages in all of Scripture. John doesn't ease into it. He goes straight to the heart. And so I want you to listen for what John says about the connection between loving God and loving each other, because those are not two separate things. They are one. So I invite you to hear these words now.
Our first passage, John 13, 34 and 35. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you should also love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Our second passage, Colossians 3:12 through 14. Therefore, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. Bear with one another, and if anyone has a complaint against another, forgive each other, just as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. Above all, clothe yourself with love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. The third passage, 1 John 4:7 through 12. Beloved, let us love one another, because love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love. God's love was revealed among us in this way. God sent his only Son into the world so that we might live through him. In this is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the atoning sacrifice for our sins. Beloved, since God loved us so much, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God. If we love one another, God abides in us, and his love is perfected in us. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
So I'm sure you all aware that in the last several days that the world has come to America. That World Cup fans from every corner of the globe has descended on this country. And one of my favorite things over the last several days has been watching on social media as people fall in love with things here in the United States that most of us just sort of shrug our shoulders at. Ranch dressing has become a revelation. The Waffle House has become a religious experience. Buc-ee's has become a pilgrimage site from people all over. And here in Fort Worth, the stockyards, I've been told, are overrun. The rodeo sold out the other night, and I even heard a rumor that the bars in the stockyards have run out of beer. Isn't it strange how the things that we drive past, the things that we drown our fries in without a second thought, have become something so amazing? And visitors from 6 continents are posting about them like they've discovered something sacred, the 8th wonders of the world. All of these people with different languages, different flags, different teams that they're cheering for, and yet somehow they've all found their way to ranch dressing in a gas station the size of an airport. My friend Danny is a pastor, and he is a massive soccer fan. And he wrote something on his blog this week about the World Cup and how in the middle of all of the noise surrounding it, with the politics and the ticket prices and the concerns about corruption, he noticed something in this first few days, this first week of matches, and that is people don't hate each other. After all, people don't hate each other. He watched as fans from Curacao celebrated a goal against Germany. He watched as Cape Verde held Spain to a draw. He watched as German tourists experienced their first taste of the Waffle House. And this is what he wrote. He said, put people in the same stadium, in the same city, or even the same diner after midnight, and most discovered that they have far more in common than they imagined. That beneath our flags, beneath our languages, beneath our politics and our borders, we remain remarkably human. And then Danny said this, and I haven't been able to shake it. He said, it's far easier to monetize fear and to weaponize distrust than it is to cultivate love and understanding and grace. It's far easier to monetize fear, to weaponize distrust, than it is to cultivate love and understanding and grace. Now, friends, that's not just a sports observation. That is a theological one. You see, we live in a world that profits from our division, that sells us fear, that feeds us distrust, and tells us that people on the other side of the lines, they are our enemies. And into that world, John says this, "Beloved, let us love one another." Because love is from God. Notice that John doesn't say, don't just love the people that look like you. Not love the people who agree with you. Not love the people who are easy to love. No. Everyone. Barna Research published a report a couple of weeks ago that shows that 3 in 4 teenagers, that is 77%, say that they are motivated to keep learning about Jesus. 3 in 4. Now, that's not a generation that has rejected God. But they are curious, I would argue, about the church, about us, about whether we say what we believe actually shows up in the way that we live our lives. And here's the question that should stop every single parent, every grandparent, every adult that is hearing this morning, and that is, what are they seeing when they watch us love or fail to love, especially the people right in front of us? Back in 1971, there were 2 Princeton psychologists that decided to do an experiment. And they took 40 seminary students from right there at Princeton Theological Seminary, 40 people who were training to be ministers, and they told them that they were going to record their sermons. And half were given the text of the Good Samaritan, Jesus' famous story about a man who stops to help a stranger that is lying beaten on the side of the road when others just sort of walked right past. And the other half of those 40 seminarians, they could preach on whichever text that they wanted. But those aspiring preachers were also given a specific route in order to get to the place where they were going to record those sermons. And along the way, along that route, they had planted a person slumped over in a doorway, groaning, clearly in need of help. And what they discovered is that of those 40 seminarians, those 40 seminary students, only 16 stopped to help. One of them actually stepped over the person standing in the door, slumped over in the doorway. Now, these were men and women who were literally carrying the text about stopping to help, and they walked past anyway. Now, it's easy for us to read that story, to hear that story, and to judge them. But here's the harder question that we all need to wrestle with, and that is, who are we walking past? The neighbor who we haven't quite introduced ourselves yet. The colleague that we have written off. The person at the edge of the community who needs someone to stop. And here's what's almost always true, and that is the person that we walk past typically isn't someone like us. Right? That's how it works, that it's easy to love the familiar, the people who look like us, who think like us, who vote like us, who live like us, who love like us. It's the unfamiliar that tests us. It's the person outside of our circle that Jesus is talking about when he says, no, love everyone. Our kids are watching to see not just if we stop, but they're watching to see who we stop for. Scientists have a phrase for what happens when you put on certain clothes. The phrase is enclothed cognition. Enclothed cognition. The idea is simple, that what you wear changes not just how other people see you, but how you see yourself, how you carry yourself, how you act towards others. We know how this works. You put on something that makes you feel good, you tend to walk differently. You stand a little taller. You engage the world differently. Take that a step further. A doctor who puts on a white coat starts thinking a little bit more like a doctor. A soldier who puts on a uniform carries themselves more like a soldier. When I put on this robe and this stole, I tend to feel and carry myself a little bit more reverent. Well, Paul knew this long before the researchers did. You heard what he said, didn't you? Clothe yourselves with compassion, with kindness, with humility, with meekness, with patience. Now, friends, he's not talking in abstractions. He's giving us a daily practice that every morning, put it on. Put on compassion and kindness, humility, patience, not because you feel it already, but simply wear it until you do. Don't think your way into a new way of acting, act your way into a new way of thinking. And above all of it, he says, put on love, which binds everything together. Notice Paul doesn't say, clothe yourself with compassion for the people in your inner circle, or kindness for the people who are easy to be kind to. No. He says, clothe yourself, full stop. Which means everyone who crosses your path today, the neighbor that you disagree with, the stranger who is hard to read, the person who looks nothing like you, the one who needs mercy even when mercy costs you something. So what do your kids see you put on in the morning? Not just your clothes, but your posture, your patience, the way you talk about the neighbor that you disagree with, the way that you treat the person behind the counter, the way you respond when someone cuts you off in traffic. Oh no, now he's gone to meddling. He's quit preaching, he's gone to meddling. You see, the truth is, church, that they are watching. And they are learning. They are learning what everyone means when they see who you love. I told you that I was at camp this last week. And I told you what I said to them at the beginning of the week, and now I'm going to tell you what I said on the last day of camp. I told them the story of the last day of camp, my last day of camp as a high school senior. A group of us who were all seniors were sitting around bemoaning that this was our last chance to attend and to take part in something like that. And one of us said, you know what, I just don't want to go back to the real world. And it was my youth minister, Mike Yard, who said, you know what, we're not going back to the real world. In fact, we're leaving it. We pushed him and asked what he meant by that. He said, you know, the real world is this. This is what God intended, a place where people are loved for who they are, not for what they do, not for what they achieve, not how they perform. This living and loving in community, this is what God envisioned when God created the world. You're not going back to the real world. You are leaving it. And I've never forgotten that. And I shared that story with the kids at camp and told them that they too, they were leaving the real world, not going back. And then this week, watching Caroline love those students, watching her show up fully for those kids, watching her create exactly the kind of space that Mike was describing. And I thought in that moment that something in her was caught. Not just from her parents, but from her church. Something that she caught at camp. Something was caught, and that was a love that looks like Jesus. Today's Father's Day, and I want to say something honest and hopefully hopeful. And that is, growing up, I played a lot of sports. And I wasn't always good. What I lacked in talent, I tried to make up for in hustle. But I loved to play. And I loved being a part of every team that I was on. Now, you may also know that my parents were divorced when I was fairly young, and I lived with my mom. But what you might not know is that my father never missed a game. Not a single one. He was my biggest fan. He was louder than probably anybody else in the stands, and he was more proud than I probably deserved. If I'm honest, we're probably not as close as either one of us would like. Distance has a way of doing that. I've moved to Texas. Life gets busy. The calls are less frequent than I think either one of us would like. But here's what I want you to know about my dad. And that is that he watches every sermon I still give. Every one. From California. Because he can't be in the room, and so he shows up in the only way he knows how. Still to this day. And so, Dad, I know you're watching. And I want you to know how much that means to me. Not just now, but my whole life. You see, church, that's what love looks like sometimes. It's not perfect, not as close as either of us would like, but faithful. It's showing up anyway, in the only way he can. And I know that not everyone in this room, not everybody listening today had a father like mine, and for that I am so sorry. I'm sorry if your dad didn't show up in the ways that you needed him to, physically, spiritually, emotionally. My heart breaks for you. And to the fathers in this room, if there is a gap between the father that you meant to be and the father that you were, the father that you are, here's what I want you to hear. And that is, it's not too late. It's not too late. The prodigal son's father didn't wait for his son to reach the door. He didn't wait for an apology. He didn't rehearse a speech. He saw him while he was still a long way off, and he ran to him. He just ran, because that's what love does. It closes the gap, not perfectly, but faithfully. And so if there's a gap that exists between you and your child, whatever age they are, pick up the phone. Send the text. Show up the only way you can. Because what I learned from my dad is that love is not primarily a feeling, it is a practice. And your kids, whatever age they are still watching. John said it perfectly. We loved because God first loved us. In other words, we're not the origin of that love, we are the conduit. The love that flows through us to our children, to our neighbors, to the stranger in need, to the person who is hard to love. It comes from somewhere else, from someone else. From a God who has looked at a broken, divided, and fear-soaked world and said, "Beloved, love everyone." And then God showed us what that love looks like. And I can make the argument that the World Cup right now is giving us a glimpse of the world as it could be, a place where shared humanity is stronger than our differences. And 40 years ago, my youth minister told a group of high school students that camp is the real world, the world that God intended, and this week I got to pass that on. Same words. 40 years later. So today, church, may we come to see that the watching world knows that we belong to God not by our theology, not by our attendance, not by our doctrine, what we believe. By this, John says, by this people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. That is what we are passing on in these 18 summers. Not a set of rules, set of beliefs, not a cultural inheritance, but a love that looks like Jesus. May it be so. May it be so.